So I'm sitting here, this is Lonnie with the International Video Game Hall of Fame, and I'm sitting with Trip Hawkins, and I will say the legendary Trip Hawkins, because there are so many things that Trip has done that if you read his bio, you'll go, how did video games exist without Trip Hawkins? And the answer is, not as well, not as well. So this is the interview with Trip Hawkins, founder of Electronic Arts, 3DO, Digital Chocolate, and it commemorates his induction into the International Video Game Hall of Fame. The conversation is going to explore history, philosophy, and the future of interactive entertainment, focusing on legacy, creativity, and the human connection in gaming as conducted by me. Serves as a discussion for both archival and inspirational record for future generations of developers and players and innovators. So we're going to start with vision and legacy. And the first question is, gaming is no longer just a hobby or a niche industry. It's social infrastructure, an artistic medium, and a multi-billion-dollar economy. If you were asked to write the mission statement for the global gaming industry for 2030 and beyond, what would it be, and what would the new frontiers, and what new frontier should it evolve into?
Well, that's a great question, and it's something I've thought about quite a bit. From the beginning of my career, I wanted the public to have a fantastic array, lots and lots of choices, just a full range of just about any possibility, because I thought of it as a new medium. It's a little bit like if Gutenberg comes up with the printed word, he's open-minded about how that might get used.
Right,
and
right.
The words that people put down there are all over the map, right?
That's right.
But it worked out really well. Here we are, still using that
words.
method. That meant a lot to me. It was just thinking about what was best for the public. And then I thought, well, the people that develop the games, that make the games, the artists, it has to be really good for them. And I'm talking about the economics now and the lifestyle, right, and whatever it takes to be fed properly to kind of do your thing creatively.
Right.
Those two things were really primal for me, when I started my career. And honestly, the business models, the way they've evolved, have unfortunately really threatened both of those subjects, because the platforms that have a 30% tax up front, even though they're really not contributing a lot of value.
Right.
They're contributing maybe a little bit more value than a credit card company, but the app stores that have 2 million apps in them, it's not like they're going to make sure you know about every single app. They can't even
begin to
think about that. So it's kind of on the developers and the publishers they work with to get discovered and to be tried out. And then they suck too much money out of the ecosystem. So it's really great if you're Apple. It's not really great if you're one of the million entities that would like to put a game in the App Store, and only one of them is going to make money. That's right. Pretty ridiculous. It troubles me. So that scheme is starting to break down. There have been a lot of court cases, a lot of legislation, and basically the App Store monopolies are beginning to get broken down. I would certainly hope in 5 years things are very different than they are now and are more fair and equitable, that allow for more freedom of expression and a better form of capitalism than what we're used to.
So, yeah, certainly they control what goes out on their platform. Apple does.
To a degree. They control it less than you might think.
Really?
I mean, that's why there's 2 million apps. They have a so-called review process, but they pretty much rubber stamp something as long as they get to continue to be the lord, and you have to be a feudal, serf in their system. So that's really still my passion, is fighting for freedom for the developers, fighting for freedom for the public.
Nice. And I know we're going to get to one of those questions that completely ties into what you just said. You've been called one of the modern architects of interactive entertainment. How do you define the legacy of your work, and what do you most want younger industry leaders to understand about your vision?
Well, we reached a transition point in the 1970s where initially there's no video games at all. And then you can put one in an arcade cabinet and put it in a bar or an arcade.
Right.
And that would work because that thing's going to cost several $1,000s to make. Nobody can afford it for the home. And all it's going to do is play one game. But if enough people put quarters in it, it'll eventually be a profitable venture if it's in a bar.
Right.
And so that's where you got Space Wars, Nolan Bushnell's first product, which was a big failure. It didn't make any money. It just happened to be the first arcade video game. And then 3 years later, came back with the formation of Atari, and games like Pong started to come out. So you're still in the early 70s.
Right.
But nothing's going on in the home.
Right.
Finally by 1972, 73, you could buy a unit that would just play Pong. But whether we're talking about the arcade or even a home product like Pong, this is not a new media. This is just a silly form of amusement. It'll keep some people amused for a few minutes, but you're not going to learn anything. It's not a simulation. I mean, it's not a simulation of anything that's important that we need to learn.
Right.
I mean, you could argue that it's a tennis game, but it's obviously not really a tennis game. It's not going to help you improve on the court if you're actually a tennis player. And as a kid, I noticed something really profound, and that is when I was at play, and that would include playing card games, board games, sports, whatever.
Sure.
When I was at play, my brain was on fire. I mean, I was really stimulated, and it's because it's interactive. Pretty much other media are not. Other media, you can look at it, you can listen to it, maybe both, you can watch it, but you can't change it. You're just on a train going somewhere and looking out a window.
Right.
You have no control over anything. Whereas in real life, we learn by doing, and we need that feedback loop. So any form of software is going to enable interaction. And then you have a question, well, what environment are we creating? What story are we telling? What agency are the players going to have to go really get engaged with something deeper and more meaningful?
Right.
And I stumbled onto, as a kid, I was a big fan of baseball and football. That came about because I'm able to see it on TV. And I'm watching it, and I can actually figure out the strategy because there are all these pauses. So you're trying to learn something. It's like good to be able to hit pause, right? Well, football, they run a play, and then there's a pause. Baseball, the pitcher throws a pitch, and then there's a pause. And then the announcers are all talking about what it all meant and what's going to happen next and what they should do.
Right.
And so I could tell, hey, there's strategy here. And it's not like somebody had ever said to me, oh, you're really good at strategy. But I was. And I knew, I just had an inner knowing. I had a natural ability to think the way they were talking with those two sports. If it was hockey, all these guys are going up and down the ice super fast. I had no idea what the hell was going on. They never really stopped.
But the pauses allow you to see those things.
Yeah, and of course, later on, I had some people that understood hockey explain more of it to me, but I still don't really completely understand, like what is it when you're too far down the ice? What do they call that?
I don't know.
Where you have to bring it back because one of your dudes was too far ahead of the puck. And yeah, anyway, I fell in love with this.
So you know more about hockey than I do.
Oh, I don't know.
I know what it sounds like when you make a goal. There.
I don't know. You live at a more northerly latitude, and you're more in a region of the world that actually cares about hockey. Anyway, I've kind of lost my place here. So I'm just talking about how, as a kid, I fell in love with baseball and football. I'm playing those sports, and I want to get better at it. I want to get smarter at it. So I'm actually open to reading books about it. I start reading the daily newspaper. I start studying statistics in the paper, like box scores and stuff. And nobody explained it to me. I just figured it out on my own. And I realized I was really comfortable with data and analysis. And then I discovered that there were some tabletop games with cards and dice that simulated baseball and football. And I got a couple of these baseball games, which were pretty authentic, but relatively simple. You could set a lineup, and there wasn't a lot more that you could do. Whereas football, you know, hey, now you're like a general on a battlefield,
Right, right.
and you know you're trying to capture the whole property. You know, it's like you get points when you've taken over everybody's territory, right?
Right, right.
And so that really appealed to me. You know, again, interest in strategy. The word strategy comes from the Latin word stratagem, which is the maneuverings of a general. So this is just kind of the mindset that I was in as a kid. And these tabletop games that were simulating these sports, they were super geeky. In fact, in 1974, these games were out in the 60s. That's when I started playing them. They had only been created a few years before I started playing them. And then D&D, Dungeons and Dragons came out in 1974. But basically, they're all kind of similar in that they're super geeky. There's all these charts and tables and books and lots of different sided dice and different probabilities.
Right, right.
And basically, a lot of human administration to operate it. You know, and you have to be kind of like a computer to keep track of everything. And so I'm doing that with these sports games. And the baseball game that I played, I really loved, and I still play it. I've got buddies from childhood. We still play it. That's how good that game is. Their football game, I'm thinking, this is not football. The people who made this game don't play football. They don't know football. This is all wrong. And then I thought, I bet I could make a better game. So that's the birth of me as a game designer.
Nice, nice.
And it was just, I'm not satisfied with this. It's not realistic. I knew much more about the actual sport and what to do differently. And so I actually, by this time, I'm still a teenager and I'm in high school, and I sort of designed a prototype, and it's pretty good. And then I thought, maybe I should try to sell this. And my parents were generous enough to lend me $5,000 because I blew through the money way too fast. I was able to get the game produced and sold a few hundred copies of it, ran out of money. And then two things came out of that. Number one, I'm thinking, this is devastating. This was my baby, and the world has rejected my baby. This is devastating. But you know what? Being an entrepreneur, this is so much fun. I got to do this again, but I don't want to screw it up the next time.
Right, right.
Okay, so this is still early 70s. So I'm knowing, okay, before I do it again, I got to learn a whole lot more. I got to finish school. I got to probably go work with somebody else for a while to learn how to run a business.
Right.
And then I can do it. And then you come out to 1975. So I'm a college kid, and I'm working for a computer think tank in Santa Monica. And a coworker comes back after lunch, and he'd visited a retail store. And he says, "Trip, you're not going to believe this. A retail store that was renting out terminals that you can bring to your home, hook up on a modem, and talk to our mainframe." You know, this is back in the days when the only computers are mainframes.
Right, right.
And it's like, wow, okay, that's incredible. And it was only $10 a month, you know, which I guess in today's dollars like $50 a month, an hour. I'm sorry, $10 an hour. Today's money, $50 an hour. So it's still pretty expensive.
Yeah, right.
But the fact that you could do it at all, right? So this is still before there's anything in the home. Anyway, and then he says, well, that's, I'm reacting like, oh my God. And he's saying, well, that's nothing. There's this company, Intel, that just figured out how to make a single chip that has a whole computer on it. That was the invention of the CPU. It was within the next year that the first hobby computer kits came out and the first personal computers came out. And I had already gotten the idea that, it's one thing to do this whole thing like it's Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And I noticed the kids that I would play with my football game, after a while they would just get exhausted having to keep track of all this stuff. It was work, And then they would wander into the family room to see what's on TV. TV's got all these colorful images, and we're all addicted to it, and it's the boob tube and all that stuff. And I thought to myself, okay, the way this is going to have to be done correctly to go mainstream is it's going to have to be in a box, it's going to be in a computer, and it's going to put pretty pictures on the screen like a television, and then everybody's going to do it. And for the next 50 years after that, people that were skeptical about video games, they would say to me, this clearly isn't really working, it's not growing very fast, and most of the public doesn't care about it. where do you think this is going?
Right.
And I got sick and tired of answering the question, so I would just say, in 50 years, all the people that don't play video games will be dead. And we're almost there.
It's pretty close.
And I'm a boomer. I'll be one of the people that's dead before too long. But you know, even now, it's really cool actually how many older generation people that didn't play video games when they were younger now do it to connect with their grandchildren. You know, I love the cross-generational aspect of it. And that comes back to the heart and soul of how this all really started for me. And I wasn't even consciously aware of it, but I was a nerd. I was introverted. I didn't know how to make friends with people. I didn't know how to maintain a conversation or start one. I was going to be a wallflower at any party you could come up with. And I realized that if I invite you to play a game with me, we got something to do. There's a context. We can do this. I'm going to kick your ass, by the way. Like my best friends, for years, all we ever cared about was kicking each other's ass. We didn't really want to get to know each other. Like I'd go have time with friends and then come back and somebody would ask me, so did you hear about so-and-so's cancer? And how is so-and-so recovering from it? I'm going, I don't know.
Yeah.
But eventually, you know, what happens is that gameplay relationship, that rivalry, that mutual respect, you know, from having a qualified adversary that's really worth tangling with, you know, you start to get more interested in them as a person. But I just wanted someone to play with. And I wanted to be able to have a social life.
Right.
So that has kind of stayed with me. It's like I feel like my whole career has been about trying to get more people to be able to connect through games. And again, it's computer software. It's the only really interactive medium. And those initial things like Pong, the idea of it being amusement, I'm thinking, no, first of all, we're going to take it into the home. And when it's in the home, it's going to have all kinds of educational value because it's going to simulate things from real life, like flying F-18s and SOP with camels and learning about flying those planes. You know, because you know, if I'm using a flight simulator, in a few hours, I can crash and destroy hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aircraft with nobody getting hurt.
And not hurt yourself.
Exactly. You know, and it's just an amazing thing to be able to simulate virtually anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had that concept in my head early on, and you know, as soon as it became possible, I wanted to start a company to make computer games. And my focus was not going to be on arcade games. I was not going to focus on amusement. I had this bigger idea. This is a new medium. It can go way further than just mere amusement. With no disrespect to arcade games, I love them too. You know, in fact, my dad, for a long time, of course, he was not a gamer at all. And then after my career got going, he got a little more curious about it. And at one point, he actually bought he got into playing arcade games and bought an arcade cabinet of his favorite game and had it in the garage.
Oh my.
So anyway, it's funny how what goes around comes around. Anyway, I finished that conversation with that guy at lunch in 1975. Sure. It would turn out he had been in Paul Heiser's store. Paul Heiser was the first man on planet Earth to open a computer retail store. He was one of Apple's first dealers, and it just happened to be in Santa Monica. How lucky is that? I'm not from Santa Monica. My parents were living in La Jolla, San Diego, wow, yeah. And I got this job up there, and so I had to kind of go up there to go to work. But that's where the first computer store was, and that's how I got to hear that story. And after my colleague left my office, I thought, okay, this is really happening. I can now map out, and I'm sort of intuiting Moore's law, I can map out when I can start a company when there are enough computers in homes, right, and I can sell enough copies of a game to make enough money to have the whole thing work. And I'm sort of penciling this out, and I said, it's going to take 7 years.
Right.
So, okay, I'm going to start my company in 1982. But meanwhile, I still got to finish school, and then I need to go work somewhere else. I chose Apple as the somewhere else that I was going to work. And this was a company that had, the year before I got there, the revenue was $773,000. We sold a few hundred hobby products, basically. And then when I started on the second day, that one of the co-founders said to me, Trip, you know something about business, which almost made me laugh. I was 24. I want you to figure out how we can sell these to businesses. And I did a very good job of that. 4 years later, our dinky little company was doing $1 billion a year in revenue and had over 4,000 employees. And I had worked closely with the founders the whole time and had learned how to be a CEO. On January 1st, 1982, I submitted my resignation. Steve and the others talked me out of it. I stayed for another few months, but I said, no, I got to go do this. And that was the birth of Electronic Arts.
Wow. Now, just so you know, I've seen a lot of your videos because not that I know stuff about you, I wanted to know what you felt passionate about, which was the reason that I added a couple of questions on the end. But well, let's catch the next one. Looking back across decades of innovation, and you probably have already covered some of this, what single philosophy or principle has remained constant for you, even as technologies, platforms, and consumer behavior can change completely?
You know, I think the big things include Moore's Law. I mean, just thinking about how technology advancement allows any form of technology to get both higher performance than it was and cheaper at the same time. And maybe semiconductors are finally getting kind of exhausted and aren't going to be improving quite at the rate they have for the last 20, 30 years. But even so, we know that that's going to continue to be present. So the kind of things that are going to be better in the future. You know, like right now, we're all used to wireless, but it doesn't always work. It's not always high enough fidelity. It's not always high speed, not always the low latency, whatever. And you know, when you're at home and you're on Wi-Fi, that's a little more consistent, right? But that's an issue. It's just always thinking about Moore's Law and imagining what will it allow to be possible in the next 5, 10 years. I find that it's actually not that hard to sort that out. Like right now, I can say, in 5, 10 years, higher performance wireless, digital wireless, it's going to be way more ubiquitous than it is now. It'll be way more available, way more consistent, higher performance, et cetera. So that's one example. For me, it's more of a philosophy. I just really always believe in the artistry of software development. And that got planted with me while I was at Apple because I had the the opportunity to work with the brilliant software engineers that came up with the whole what you see is what you get thing. And I was happy to really be able to contribute to that. So for example, I arranged for the first mouse to come into Apple.
Oh, wow.
I brought the first spreadsheet software into Apple. I wrote most of the primary document that laid out the business plan and the roadmap for the products. And there was a big battle about that. I was on the winning side of that battle. It was interesting because on the engineering side at Apple, a lot of Hewlett-Packard people had been hired, both higher level engineers. And they were not accustomed to anybody in marketing telling them anything because Hewlett-Packard for many decades made tools for engineers. So you have engineers making products for people like themselves. You didn't really need much, you didn't believe you needed any input. They were probably wrong. You talk to a lot of engineers and they say, we don't need managers, we don't need marketing. They just want to do it all themselves. God bless them. They're also so charming about their attachment to their work that there's another meme that if you leave it up to the engineers, it'll never come out. You literally have to take it away from them when you decide that it's ready.
They're not done with it, right?
But at any rate, specifying a whole bunch of stuff like this document that I wrote, one of the things we said we wanted the customers to be able to have on the screen were icons. And I put it in quotes because I knew that nobody would know what the hell I was talking about. It was I was introducing a new term, unbeknownst to us, right around the same time, Xerox was working on a new office computer that would also use icons. But we were like right on the bleeding edge of all these things being invented. And then, of course, Bill Gates and Windows pretty much stole them all. But people like Steve Jobs and I were there first, or we were head of that crowd. But just working with these genius software developers like Bill Atkinson, who just passed away last year, Larry Tesler, who's also gone, so many of them. Again, that's where I realized this is a new medium. This is an art form. These are artists. So the right kind of company for me to start would be a next generation publishing company that knows how to work with artists and is basically bringing Hollywood business practices into the Silicon Valley and merging those two cultures together and coming up with something completely new. And it's funny because I gave, first public speech I gave about electronic arts, a lot of my competitors were in the room, and they all told the media afterwards that I would be out of business in a year. I was doing so many innovative things. They just thought, this is nuts. You know, they weren't doing any of these things. You have to remember, this is 1982. You go into a computer store, it's a little hobby store. There's a brown pegboard, like somebody's shop in their garage, and it's got little metal hooks hanging on it. And you got games on floppy disks in little plastic kitchen bags with some kind of sticker on it. That's the merchandising. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a turkey shoot, man. I'm gonna take this to such a whole different level because we're going to have albums like records. We're going to have art, and we're going to treat the developers like they're rock stars. And nobody's ever thought about it this way. Nobody's ever done it. And where they were right about me going broke is I was committed to selling directly to retailers and having the extension of electronic arts being connected with the customer as close as possible to that real consumer end user that would go into that store. And nobody ever done that. So basically, if you were Apple, you were, or IBM, you were selling some software along with your hardware. Same thing if you're Atari. But nobody that was just purely a software company sold directly to retail. They sold it to these really powerful monopolistic distributors that took way too much of a rake and then sold it to the retailers. And then you didn't really have a relationship with the retailer, and therefore you didn't have a relationship with the consumer. If you could actually be in the store, you could do merchandising in there, you could figure out promotions in there, you could train people. I mean, you could do all kinds of things. You could have events where you'd be in contact with the public, and so on. But it requires a lot of overhead costs, and you can't really afford to do it unless you're putting a whole lot of products through the pipe. And that's where the critics were right. And yeah, we got pretty close to the edge the next year or two. And there were times where I was highly tempted to call the biggest distributor because I knew that they would make a big order and it would pay payroll for a month. And I'd be sitting there at my desk just having this debate, and there's a phone, and all I have to do is pick up the phone, call in this order, and I can cover payroll. And then my other hand would reach out and go, no, no. So yeah, the most powerful distributor, we never did any business with them. They weren't very happy about it. So nobody thought it was going to work. There were a whole bunch of other innovative startup things that were done, including building out a bunch of software development tools, because we had developers that were teenagers that had an Apple II or an Atari 800, and they were just hacking away on their own machine, which wasn't really very powerful. So if you're like writing program code and you want to compile it, they didn't have a good compiler. If you're going to compile it on that consumer product, well, where are you going to store it? I mean, there were all these issues. So from day one, it's like, okay, we're going to create the industry's first studio, which is really just a really beefy, high-end personal computer, and a whole bunch of software development tools, a full suite of everything you need, graphic arts, sound, compilers, symbolic debuggers, it's all the stuff that you might need. And nobody ever done that. And that was a technology contribution we could make to just the whole concept of how we're going to relate to the developers. And of course, we're going to have a different kind of contract that's mirroring Hollywood and Silicon Valley. Thousands of companies copied our contract. We made these clever album covers. About 25 of our competitors copied exactly those albums. So instead of going out of business, we became the de facto industry standard for everything. And so I really, when people ask me, what did I really do? I modernized video game publishing. And publishing means, okay, it's a consumer business. Individuals can buy them, they can take them home, they're going to use them at home. So it's a different location than the arcade.
Right.
And yeah, with all due respect, Nolan Bushnell, Ralph Baer, those are the guys that invented video games. Okay, but they were pretty much in the arcade making amusement, and I was just trying to go to a different planet entirely.
Which you did, which you clearly. And you were just talking about this innovation and turning points. As your career with EA and 3DO and Digital Chocolates, you've tried to predict and shape the market by leading it in new directions, which you just talked about. Can you name one significant movement when a deeply held conviction about the future of gaming was completely overturned by reality? And what personal lesson did you take from that?
There was a time when EA was firing on all cylinders and had been growing very nicely and was profitable every quarter for like 5 years in a row. So we kind of made it. And then Nintendo showed up in the late 80s. And we're doing all this stuff on personal computers, and everybody had pronounced consoles dead. And then Nintendo manages to revive the category. They made a better 8-bit product. They had it at a low price. They had created some of their own games that were really fantastic. They had made arcade games that they had put on the console. It was quite a good offering, but their business model was and remains awful. It's the same business model Apple has cribbed. That's just really lousy for developers. It raises everybody's prices. It narrows the category down to sure things that might actually work, because you don't have the ability to afford to experiment.
Right.
Even now with Nintendo, I mean, they're a powerhouse company. A product like the Switch, they're going to sell over 100 million of those, of course. But then you look at the product range that's going to happen on it. It's going to be pretty narrow compared to what's on your PC. What you can do on a PC. So I was always looking at it more like a PC open platform. Anybody, anywhere can make anything they want, and they can serve any audience of any size. Same with the World Wide Web. Those are the two remaining kind of industry standards that they're de facto standards. They weren't created by governments. They weren't created by a big mass committee of industry competitors. But you look at other media industries, television, film, music, et cetera. They have better histories at having organized industry standards, so nobody has to think about whether or not they can hear their music, right? Anyway, it's just been a shame that the video game industry's never been like that. And so here I am with Nintendo coming in with their business model, and I'm going, that's going to destroy us. If we have to do that, I might as well shoot myself. And then I'm thinking, so consoles are going to be back, huh? They're going to eat in all these homes with children, and once that home has one of their machines, they're not going to buy my games.
Right.
Is the kid's going to be playing on that thing? And sure enough, our growth rate just started to slow down. And I thought, I don't want to do that. Forbes magazine around that time interviewed me. Very nice story, really nice color photograph. It was they were trying to jump me because they pretty much had figured out Trip's painted into a corner. I wonder what Trip has to say about that. And of course, they're interviewing me in that style where they want to keep asking you the same question differently until they get the soundbite that
They want.
Yeah, they've already decided what the story is. And finally, I gave them the soundbite. Every dog has its day. So that's the headline that's the name of the story, and it's what I'm saying about Nintendo. So they just know, this idiot, what arrogance. This guy's painting the corner and doesn't even see it. This guy thinks Nintendo doesn't know what they're doing, and it's a flash in the pan. I mean, Nintendo's going to take over the world. What's wrong with this guy? They wanted me to pose with a photographer holding a joystick on the hood of my convertible car. I was smart enough to say, no. They were just trying to make me look as stupid as possible. And I was in a moment of some degree of stupidity. That was true. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I get out of this box? And for years, one of the memes in the industry had, after I had proven everybody wrong and EA had made it and become #1 after only like 3 years.
Right.
And when I started, I counted 135 specific competitors. So that was a lot to pass on our way up. And after all, there was a meme about, don't bet against Trip. Whatever Trip's doing, you better pay attention to it, because he's right a lot, and that's how he's got to be #1. Anyway, so here I am, genuinely painting in this corner, and I think, okay, well, if the consoles are going to come back, is there a way to do this on next generation consoles, 16-bit consoles? And is there a way for us to do it without being that kind of business model? And that's when I learned about the Sega Mega Drive that would be launching in 1988 in Japan. Under $200, first 16-bit console that was really any good. It had the Motorola MC68000 CPU, which was in the Apple Lisa, in the Apple Mac, in the Amiga, in the Atari ST, and in a lot of arcade machines. In fact, we'd gotten a license to Atari's Marvel Madness game.
Right.
And we were able to do a very easy port to get that running on the Commodore Amiga, which is kind of incredible. And then I'm thinking to myself, this 16-bit Sega machine, it's got a sound chip, it's got a graphics accelerator. It's not a hardcore, badass 3D machine, but it's interesting. And I'm thinking, yeah, we can probably take our whole Commodore Amiga product line, including Marvel Madness, and get it running on the Sega Genesis. But I don't want to have a Nintendo-style business model, so I want to reverse engineer it, do a clean room reverse engineering. So this turned out to be not the only time it had been tried in industry history. Up to today, it's been tried a handful of times by different people. It's only been pulled off successfully this one time when we did it with the Sega Genesis. We had to wait until the product came out in Japan and buy some. Then we could start the clean room. And then we were, of course, expecting them to launch in the US in 1989. And we had to analyze the US version to make sure they hadn't changed it, because Nintendo had a security chip. And if they had implemented any of that kind of scheme, that would have blown us out of the water, because Nintendo had a patent on that. You can't just go infringe somebody's patent with reverse engineering. But it all played out where it took us about a year to figure out exactly how the machine worked in the clean room, which was a really, in my view, the work that my guys did in that clean room in that year, they're the biggest heroes of my life. You know, the personal heroes that changed my life, it's those guys. They've got it all figured out. They had to sacrifice their ability to make games for that machine because they had looked at copyrighted information in the clean room. What you're allowed to do in clean room is just look at that copyrightable information because you're trying to learn how a machine works. Then you're not going to exploit that information. What you're going to do is write a book about it and then allow other people to exploit it by reading your book that tells them how to make the game. But they had to sacrifice their ability to be software artists for that platform. And then clean room engineering, it's really primitive. It's like Stone Age. You don't get to bring a lot of stuff in there with you. You've got to just make stuff and then use the stuff you make to be the tools you do to figure the things out. It was really quite an adventure, like in the film, my favorite film, Lawrence of Arabia, where they attack Aqaba from the rear. It was just one of those amazing things that actually worked out. So we got that thing figured out. We pulled all of our developers in for a big conference and got everybody trained up on how to make games for the Sega Genesis, which is the name they used in the United States. And then on the brink of shipping our first, going to our first CES where we announced that we had Sega games and we're doing it. Of course, we weren't going to even use the word Sega. We were going to say, hey, that's a new 16-bit console game.
Sure. We're
trying to make sure that we avoid getting sued for trademark infringement. We knew they were going to throw their book at us. And I had as a result of this scheme, I decided, okay, I need to take Electronic Arts public. So we did that. So we had extra cash on hand to be able to fight a lawsuit. But I was convinced if they sued, we would win. Anyway, here we are on the brink of our public announcement of all this. And I was able to engage Sega and ultimately convince them that we would all be better off if we were partners running out in front of Nintendo, taking back a whole bunch of market share. And eventually they agreed to a really great deal where EA had complete freedom and it was virtually free for us. And we didn't have to put up with any of the usual nonsense. And over the next couple of years, the value of the company went from $60 million to $2 billion. So that was the inflection point where the company really took off.
So it kind of worked.
So that worked. and then I'm thinking, well, what do I do next?
Right.
And that's what didn't work. Because I'm thinking, this is going to be great for about 5 years. And then I'm going to have a little red dot right here. All the hardware companies are thinking, we're all trying to be like Nintendo, and we want to make sure that Trip can't pull this off again. And I'm thinking, well, shoot, that would be like a quick renaissance, nice period of time that then ends badly.
Right.
So what do I do about that? And I thought, well, some of the best software companies, starting with Microsoft, are involved on the hardware side. And maybe that's the thing to do here, is to try to be like the Dolby Labs of game architecture, and get a whole bunch of companies to use it as a standard of compatibility. And that idea caught on, and it was pretty easy to find investors that wanted to do it. The rest of the management team at EA and the board of directors, plenty of them were very cautious and didn't want that project to eat the company. So we ended up agreeing to spin it out as a separate company, and that ultimately did not work out in the end. That was 3DO, and it would be a really long story explaining the good, the bad, and the ugly of what happened with 3DO. It just didn't quite make it. It was a little bit too early in some ways, a little bit too late in others, and Sony did a really amazing, great job on every aspect of the PlayStation business that was, maybe 2 years behind us, but took advantage of computer memory plunging in cost. It had been driven up in the early 90s by all the demand of all the PCs that were selling like hotcakes, and that was a problem if you're trying to sell a video game at a machine at a lower price. And you had 3 megabytes of memory, it was going to at least add $100 or $200 to the price, just because of the price being unusually high at that time. And the price came down just in time for Sony and their launch. And they also were one of the world's biggest manufacturers of CD-ROM drives. And again, there was an inflection point there where the price came down. They had a newer ASIC, they had a newer set of custom chips that were higher performance. So they got higher performance chips, cheaper memory that that allows them to hit a lower price point. Same thing with the CD-ROM drive. And then they marketed it really well. One of the Sony executives told me they copied a lot of our licensing program in terms of how we provided information and management to third parties that were licensees. And of course, we had about 1,000 software licensees, but it didn't matter. Anybody that was working with us that heard about Sony was going to, we're going to make sure whatever we do on 3DO works on Sony. But Sony had everything in place to sell a lot of hardware. And once a new platform comes out and 1 million hardware units have been sold, now all the software developers are going to start believing that it's going to go to the moon. And it was pretty much the end for me and 3DO.
As a follow-up, looking ahead, is there any new frontier in interactive gaming that you would like, that you would be trying to get ahead of now if you were starting a new company in 2025?
That's a great question. The things that really matter now, first of all, gamers are, number one, interested in the social connections around gaming, and they want to play with friends, sometimes together on squads, sometimes it's in an esports format, sometimes it's just being on a big map with some people that are actual friends, some that are gamer friends, some that are arch rivals, but being in a socially competitive environment, very common, very popular. So that's where you always have to start thinking is how are you going to make sure that the whole scheme produces a lot of social value. What is now the second most important thing is convenience. One of the things about the social piece is that if you want to play with me, you're going to introduce me to the game that you love and get me to try it. So,
Sure.
So that's one of the benefits of social value being treasured, is that it helps any of these products get more traction and more trial because they're finding out about it from their friends. And of course, nowadays with all the influencers and streamers, leveraging cloud source resources and on not just social media platforms, but platforms in the game industry like Twitch, there's just all these opportunities for that organic part of the industry to help get the word out and help good products get discovered. So that's all related to the social piece. On the convenience side, Clayton Christensen, who came up with the idea of the disruptive product and invented that term. A lot of people read his first book about that. It was called The Innovator's Dilemma. And then, of course, he had a lot of big companies come to him after the book came out and say, you got to help us. You have to help my big company learn to be disruptive, which didn't go very well. He eventually wrote a second book about it called The Innovator's Solution. Not a lot of people read that book. To this day, I haven't met anybody that's read it other than me. But one of the things that he talked about in the second book is they had continued all this research on all these different industries, and they had learned that after the disruption happens, so an example would be a mobile phone. That's a disruptive thing. It allows you to make a phone call anywhere, anytime, or receive a phone call. That was a disruptive feature. Wireline phones couldn't do that. It didn't matter that the first mobile phones were this big, way more than a brick. And then what happens over time is that you're talking about that feature with disruption. It doesn't care about the high performance of the established industry, because they're not trying to do what they're trying to do. They don't care if calls get dropped. And mobile, it's like, we don't care if some calls get dropped, if there's gaps in the coverage, it won't matter. And we don't care if the call quality is that good either. Whereas Ma Bell, man, you never got a call dropped. The quality was great, So here you are with disruption, and it's creating a new market with a new audience. And we've seen this in so many different ways with computing devices, smart devices, and games. And so that's all played out. We see that over and over. But this second book of his, he said, there reaches a point when this industry growing, incorporating the disruptive product element of it, where everybody agrees there's enough performance, and now they want more convenience. Okay, now think about for a minute what that means in today's context is that you get things like, it's really convenient. I got this incredibly powerful computer that is in my pocket all the time. And I've got all these access to all these different services all the time. That's pretty darn convenient. But then think about the fact that it's talking to the cloud most of the time. And case in point, back in the day, at first you had to go to an arcade to play a video game. That's kind of inconvenient. I got to dress up. I got to drive a car. I got to buy some food and drinks. I got to compete with other people who want to use that same table or that same device. That's one convenience. And then you get to the next generation where, okay, to get the game, I have to drive to the store to buy it. Oh, and then I have to come back home and only go into that one room where I've got my console or my PC, and that's the only place I can play it.
Right.
Okay, well, I don't know about you, but I use Google Search. I use Gmail. I use Google Contacts. And I can be anywhere. I could go contact the hotel right now and get a room, and I can do my email off the TV screen in the hotel, or I can go to the business center and do it off one of those computers. I can go to my friend's house and do it on his computer. I could do it on your phone right now.
That's right.
Right. So that's really convenient, right? Yeah. And then suddenly now you have all these cloud services where that principle continues to carry over. So that's a big deal. The cloud is everything. And we're in the midst of that transition right now. So that's going to continue to be a major growth phase. But now you add in artificial intelligence, that's a whole new kicker. And again, whether we're talking about ubiquitous broadband wireless access, which would be awesome, or we're talking about NVIDIA chips in data centers that are doing AI, which would take them off what they're already doing, is they're in data centers doing streaming services like live interactive video games that you and I can play through a server where we don't have to even own the hardware. We're doing it on our, we just need a screen. So if you're a subscriber to the Xbox, Game Pass streaming service, you got this catalog of games that you can play anytime you want, but you don't have to worry about where to store them.
Right.
You don't have to have a shelf with a bunch of boxes on it. You don't have to have a massive amount of offline hard drive space. These are huge amounts of memory. Let the cloud worry about that, right? So that's kind of where we're at, and AI in particular. So you can tell there's going to be all this growth in the next decade. Capital expenditures on data centers, infrastructure, towers,
Billions
just,
and billions
just all
and
that.
billions
And
of
it's going
dollars.
to have to proceed at the rate that these companies can afford the CapEx expenditures and the people they have to go actually build it out. And if they tried, and of course, a lot of them are raising insane amounts of money. And some of them will end up missing the mark and failing. They'll either be too early or too late or do it slightly wrong. But it's going to be an intense amount of activity. And already, think about how you feel about AI now and how you use AI now compared to what you thought you might be doing even just 2 years ago. And then what about 2 years before that where you weren't thinking about it at all?
No.
So again, I've never seen anything happen quite so fast. It's like we all knew what it was and how it would work, but we knew that you needed to have a massive amount of simultaneously addressable memory with a CPU able to know the addresses everywhere and to be able to build really big LLMs, large language models. And that's where the real breakthrough got made, is finally with Moore's Law getting to the point where, now we can actually address a lot more memory because these chips can manage that. So that process is going to continue, and there's going to be probably a lot of competition between the demand for streaming services and the demand for AI in the data centers. But that's going to be a big phase.
Yeah, staggering amounts of money. I actually every day get an AI newsletter, sent to me so I can stay on top of what's going on, and use Chat GPT on all the time, and you're like, it's not always right, but it's very fast.
Sometimes if you ask it something where you know what the answer is, that's how you can tell the relative degree of intelligence.
Yeah. I'm like, you ask it something, and I have to go, but Trip Hawkins is really famous. Don't you think Trip Hawkins should be the most famous person in the world? And it'll go, well, I see what you're saying, and you're right.
That's pretty dumb AI.
Well, I didn't ask it about you, I asked it about me, but I was just using you as an example. But it is interesting. You can literally have a conversation with it and convince it that you're right. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how good that's going to be.
But they're very fluent even when they're wrong.
Yeah.
They sound smart.
Yeah. When you founded EA, the software artist concept was revolutionary. Now that data science monetization models and massive studio dominant, did the industry trade artist institution for the scientist model? Is there a necessary course correction needed to restore creativity's balance with commerce, especially as AI permeates every part of creation? And you've already started to cover most of that.
What I would add is that there's definitely more room to nurture and enable real creative artists. And there's all kinds of things that are more structured and that are more like engineering. And there's a long tortured history in the industry where the engineers don't necessarily respect the graphic artists and vice versa. And they really would benefit from understanding that those two roles are both necessary. neither one is that qualified to do the other person's roles. I mean, they really ought to just make up and get along and have some mutual respect, you know. But you know, it's I think it's an ongoing process, and when the economy is tough, like the last few years, were already difficult. It's a crazy period of history, and then you throw the effect of AI in, and a lot of jobs got eliminated in the game industry in the last few years. In fact, I read a story recently where in the last 2 years it was like 25% of the game industry workforce. That surprised me. That's a bigger number than I would have guessed. But I think longer term, and I know people that are doing this. I know some entrepreneurs that are starting a company where they have 7 functions reporting to them, but they're all run by AI agents. And you know, at some point, there maybe need another couple of humans, but it is actually possible to do that. And I think of the way that the humans have to level up their capacity is a little bit like moving from being the first violinist in an orchestra and becoming the conductor, and then saying, okay, now I'm going to promote that second violinist to number 1 because they're really badass and they've got a Stradivarius, and I don't think I can improve upon that. But this whole horn section, the whole brass thing, we can do that with AI.
Right.
And by the way, Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones, said the same thing about the brass section being replaced by an electric guitar, a single guitar.
A single guitar.
And it's really true. I mean, you know, the band size with rock and roll just shrank down. But did it destroy music? Did everybody in music lose their job, you know, when that brass section went away? No. In fact, same thing with transportation. You go back to the days when you had to know how to ride a horse and have a horse and know how to shoe the horse. And everybody's got those skills, and some people are selling a lot of buggy whips and saddles. And then you get the car, and it kind of wipes a lot of that out. And then you get the plane. Yeah, we make these changes, but the transportation industry is, you know, just continuing to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I think for a lot of people, it's always a question of retraining, you know, and companies and governments need to be prepared to invest in retraining their people for what is next and training them to be able to be a conductor. It's more like a management role. So I think there's opportunities now for more people to, in fact, step up into management roles that are kind of integrating these inputs, some of which are human, some of which are AI.
You know, I read someplace that they expect 90% of the websites to be built by AI in the next 10 years. And I was like, wow, that's pretty aggressive. But then I've worked with some of the AI agents and stuff, and literally I'm running for a political office, and I'm like, okay, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. And it's like, not only did it tell me that, then they extrapolated everything for me and said, would you like to go this direction? I go, no, I just want this information. It's pretty intense how much information AI can give you. So when you're talking about eliminating a person, I mean, that's taken a person all day long to find out the information I asked it. So yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and AI is allowing humans the opportunity to level up into a role that's more strategic, more managerial, more creative.
Right. Well, we're almost halfway done with the fun. People, play, and the human element is the next section. What fundamental assumption about human nature and play, widely accepted in the early days of personal computing, do you now believe was wrong when viewed through the last 50 years of gaming evolution?
I'm not sure I have one. You know, I think there are a few things that a lot of people are skeptical about that have proven out. First of all, a lot of people just thought it was a niche market,
right? And
it really isn't. And we've got over 3 billion gamers now, and if you track who's playing by generation, you know, the younger generations, it's a way high penetration rate. It's really a mainstream part of everyday life.
The sheer amount of play. I mean, it's like people talk about sports and those kind of things, like in movies. I'm like, more money's made in video games and games than movies.
I do believe that video games are on their way to being the largest media category.
I believe that too. How do you define fun Now compared to 1982, has its meaning changed or have our tools just involved fun?
You know, there's always a question about fidelity. You know, what is the quality and harmony of what is I'm seeing that I'm going to be interacting with? And that's going to continue to get better, just as you've seen it get better with music and with film, et cetera, cameras, everything. And that's always there's a trade-off. You know, like if you're spending all this time and money on technology to make something more vivid,
right,
that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
And you know, so you look at categories like VR or augmented reality. They're kind of niche markets. They are quite a bit less convenient than just kicking back, putting your feet up in your family room,
right,
and watching a screen across the room. You know, I don't need to be in a bodysuit and all that. I want to have my drink and my snacks and be able to talk to my wife and, you know, be really comfortable, right?
Right, right. I did some of that first VR in the 80s when they were stick figures, and I was like, this is not going to, this needs to evolve, because I was like falling off the edge of stuff. Like, I don't usually have that lack of comparison. Let's see, 82, yeah, it did change its meaning. Based on personal experience and observation and the industry's changes, do you believe that esports represents the future of gaming? Or is it more of a niche, hardcore phenomenon? And what is its long-term potential?
I think esports is still a fairly small industry, but as time passes, there are going to be more generations that have grown up playing games and have product franchises that they really care about, and those will become esports and will become popular in the same way that the playground games, you know, started to have professional leagues and get on television. So I think over time, esports is going to become a much bigger deal, and I think the way that industry is going to work is that it's going to be like a professional sport, a professional league, and then there's going to be a viewing audience, and that viewing audience will be a little more actively involved because it may be that they're on a platform that's more interactive like Twitch. They're maybe using Discord to chat with their friends. It's going to be more interactive and more game-like, and otherwise, even as adults, you'll have fans that still play that game. You know, whereas what happens now with sports is that kids grow up and then they can't play the game anymore because they're not good enough.
If you could revisit one decision or partnership to alter the trajectory of gaming history, which would it be and why?
When I started 3DO, it put me in a situation where pretty soon, unbeknownst to me, I was going to be required to choose which company to lead. So I was the biggest shareholder of both companies. I was chairman of the board of both companies. And I had been the CEO of EA, and I had become the CEO of 3DO. And EA was kind of like a rebellious teenager, and 3DO was kind of like an infant having open heart surgery. And so I chose to focus on 3DO. I felt a responsibility to do that. And I sometimes wonder how my life would have been different if I'd just stayed at EA and had the faith that platforms like the PlayStation could float EA's boat. I think actually if 3DO had not happened, it would have been a lot harder for EA with Sony, because they would not have been able to negotiate such a good deal.
How do you personally want to be remembered within gaming? As a businessman, visionary, or a storyteller of human creativity through technology?
I find that so far, I mean, I really appreciate the recognition of the International Video Game Hall of Fame and why we're sitting here right now. I really appreciate it. About 15 years ago, no, actually, how long ago was it? I can't remember anymore. I think it was in 2005. I was inducted into the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame, and what pleased me about that is that they don't really put business people in there. It's really about game design. And I thought, wow, cool. I mean, I've always thought of myself as the business guy that's enabling the artists, and I'm giving them all kinds of good advice, and that included, you know, game ideas and feature changes and tuning and details and whatever. They wanted to recognize the design role that I played with sports games, and so that actually it's kind of become the thing that I realized, that I had the biggest impact because of the sports games, notably the franchises like Madden.
Right. I think that's the one that people think of the quickest because it's such a big impact.
Yeah, and it's just fun for me to feel like, okay, so there's some recognition about what I did as a business person, but also as a creator.
So I've got 2 questions left, and then we can talk about one comment that I have later. I saw that you were into strategic games, and as we look at strategic games, which I like too, is they're getting deeper and deeper. Even pinball has like depth to it now. It's not just bank it here, get a free ball. It's like levels and levels and levels of understanding just to get good at it. And video games continue to get the same kind of depth. What do you think? Where do you think that's going to end up at?
The sophistication of gameplay loops, you've got a core loop and then having side loops. That's actually, in fact, also happened in the last few decades with other media like television and film. Every one of these industries has figured out that the public has a brain, and they can keep track of more things, and they want to process and analyze and figure out, okay, what's the solution to this mystery, and what should this person do, and what are they going to do?
Right.
And it's amazing watching. And I had 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and got to have a market research lab in my home for like 30 years. And they were all, my 2 older kids were really into Lost, and I couldn't follow Lost. But again, that was one of the archetype leaders that kind of helped plant that flag and demonstrate that people have brains and they're more stimulated. They can actually manage more than a simple narrative, right?
Right.
So obviously, same truth with video games. And my favorite example is slot machines. You think about the beginning slot machine, it's just got wooden tumblers in it. That's your game loop. That's the whole story. There's not much there. And then, of course, digitally, now I can have all kinds of different things on the same machine. But then they introduced these whole different gameplay loops with different currencies, and they managed to trick you into thinking you're winning, when you're actually probably not. Because you're going to suffer on the conversion of the currency into the other currency you're looking for, U.S. dollars. So it's a really useful thing to, you got to have a primary gameplay loop, but thinking about these other adventures you can have and having that really fill people up, it's definitely a thing.
I have one question left, which I've already asked you. I told you I'd ask you. What question do you want to answer that we haven't asked?
Wow.
There's always something that people want to say that nobody asks them.
Okay, here it is. What is the correct attitude to have about life?
Like that.
Yes.
And what is the correct attitude to have about life, Triff?
Okay, so take 2. The correct attitude to have about life is that you're working on yourself and you're trying to grow up. You're trying to be the best version of yourself you can be. And that consists of having purpose, having passion, and having a mission. And a lot of those 3 words get used interchangeably, and when people say, oh, you need to have passion, but then they won't use the other words or vice versa. I've come up with a way of looking at those 3 words and use all of them. There are things that I noticed when I was young that I did kind of easily, kind of naturally, and then there were other things that were just nigh impossible. And I had friends where it was the opposite. So we're not all equally good at all the same things. So we're all really brilliant. We're all amazing. Mm-hmm. I love Marianne Williamson's quote about discovering how powerful we are. she said basically we're powerful beyond imagination. It's really true in terms of what we're capable of. And if we just trust ourselves and allow our imagination to roam. At any rate, the concept of purpose in my mind is to figure out what comes naturally to you that you feel like you're good at, and you don't have to maybe study it as much or work as hard at it. You want to use that because that's who you are.
Right.
Then you have the passion. That's all about not doing what other people want you to do, figuring out yourself in your own autonomy, your own agency. What is it that means something to you personally that you really get passionate about and care about? For me, that's when I was a kid, loving the strategy around football and baseball. So we got purpose, we got passion, and then what's mission? Well, mission, it's kind of a spiritual or even religious word. And it's what you need to do to heal yourself, because we all go through childhood trauma. A lot of it is in our unconscious mind, because the first few years of life, our hippocampus hasn't fully activated all the memory circuits. And that's why you don't remember, you don't have like videotape recall of what you were doing when you were a 1-year-old.
Right.
And no doubt, if you're a 1-year-old, just imagine coming through the birth canal into a bright hospital. You're all in this really cozy environment for months. It's nice and dark and it's all chill. And then suddenly there's all this noise and strangers and bright lights.
People slapping you.
Yeah, it's a pretty hostile way to get things started. And you don't understand it. So pretty much your first few years of life, I'm pretty sure it's like you get put in a crib and they turn the light off and close the door and you're alone. Pretty sure as a kid, you're probably thinking within 10 minutes, I will be eaten by a leopard. Because why would you think anything else? You don't have any kind of context of human civilization. You're going to need decades to come to understand it. So we all get traumatized at least a little and don't even really understand how it affected our personality.
Sure.
So we've got this psychic junk, and you got to go figure out what it is, and you've got to go get help sorting out how to let go of the ways that you have blind spots and the ways that you're stuck. And that's ultimately the path to genuine happiness. And once you've got those three things going for you, regardless of what you achieve or how much money you make, I'm a really good example here of how it's not really about the money. I never really cared that much about the money. My focus was really not on the money. It was on building great products and having lots of happy customers and kind of changing human society.
Brilliant. Trip, pleasure meeting you. Really, an honor meeting you. And
well, a lot of fun. Thank you.
We as a nonprofit, we have the great gift of being able to tell people that they're great. I don't know what other organization has the ability just to say, you're a great person. You've done great things.
Well, everybody's great. Wouldn't it be great if our society was just better at having everybody encourage everybody around them all the time?
And they'd all be better. For
That's
sure.
right.
For sure.
And certainly in a better mood.